Welcome. My name is Annie Rogers, and on behalf of the ADDitude team, I'd like to thank you all for joining today's ADHD experts presentation, especially for Women's Health Month, titled Caring for You So You Can Care for Your Child, a webinar for moms with ADHD. Parenting is hard, and raising a child with ADHD comes with its own unique set of challenges. This is especially true for parents who have ADHD themselves and who may need additional support as they battle daily with organization, motivation, and/or emotional dysregulation. Furthermore, the toll of raising a child may be even greater for mothers, who often bear the brunt of parenting. In today's webinar, we'll learn more about the challenges related to parenting with ADHD and leave with strategies that improve parental mental health and well-being. Leading today's presentation is Dr. Andrea Chronis-Tuscano. Dr. Chronis-Tuscano is a professor at the University of Maryland and director of the UMD ADHD program and UMD Succeeds College ADHD Clinic. Her research focuses broadly on understanding early predictors of developmental outcomes for children with ADHD and developing novel treatments that target these early risk and protective factors. Much of this research has addressed issues related to parenting and parent mental health. Dr. Chronis-Tuscano is the past president of the International Society for Research in Child and Adolescent Psychopathology, associate editor of the Journal of Consulting and Clinical Psychology, fellow of the Society for Clinical Child and Adolescent Psychology, fellow of the Association for Psychological Science, fellow for the Association for Behavioral and Cognitive Therapies, former associate editor of the Journal of Clinical Child and Adolescent Psychology, and standing member of the NIMH Mental Health Services Research Review Committee. She is the recipient of multiple NIH grants and has served on several NIH review committees relevant to developmental psychopathology and interventions. Dr. Chronis-Tuscano is also the author of Supporting Caregivers of Children with ADHD, an integrated parenting program. Before I hand over the microphone to Dr. Chronis-Tuscano, I have just a few housekeeping items. Those of you tuned in to the live webinar may download the slides now by clicking on the Event Resources section of your webinar screen. And if you're interested in the Certificate of Attendance option, look for instructions in the email you will receive about an hour after the live broadcast. If you are listening in replay or podcast mode, visit ADDitudemag.com and search podcast 399 to access the slides, the webinar replay, and the Certificate of Attendance option. If you support the work we're doing here at ADDitude to strengthen the ADHD community, we encourage you to visit ADDitudemag.com/subscribe and sign up for ADDitude Magazine for your family or to share with a teacher or loved one who could benefit from greater ADHD understanding. All right, without any further ado, I'm so pleased to welcome Dr. Chronis-Tuscano. Thank you so much for joining us today and for leading this important discussion for mothers with ADHD.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here today to talk about this really important topic for Women's Mental Health Month. And before we get started, I just want to acknowledge the co-authors of our treatment manual, Dr. Kelly O'Brien and Dr. Christina Danko, and also some funding that we received from the NIMH to support this work. So thank you. I'm going to begin today by talking about our transactional model of ADHD in families. And at first glance, this might look pretty overwhelming, but it really sort of sets the stage for everything we're going to be talking about today. And that is that we know that ADHD, that its causes are neurobiological and genetic. But yet, there are so many factors within the context of the lives of children with ADHD that can influence how they do over time and whether they take on more adaptive outcomes across development or if they experience more of the serious negative outcomes that can result from ADHD. And today we're really going to be talking a lot about this interplay between parent characteristics and child characteristics, and how the two influence each other, and how all these other factors like cultural factors, the marital or co parenting relationships, sibling relationships, and other school and community factors can either support kids with ADHD on their journey or contribute to more difficulties over time. And in particular, today we're going to talk about ADHD symptoms or diagnoses of ADHD in parents. And for Women's Mental Health Month, we're going to be focusing mostly on moms, and also other emotion regulation difficulties and executive functioning difficulties that parents might experience that might make it more challenging for them to provide the type of environment that could help their kids be most successful. So, one of the premises of today is that children with ADHD really need superhero parents. And that's really a tall order. It's challenging, it's stressful. And at the same time, some of the difficult behaviors that kids with ADHD show really pull for negative responses from parents. So how do we balance these two things? The fact that kids with ADHD need superhero parents, but yet at times it might feel like they're actually pulling for negative responses from their parents. And we want to think about this in light of the fact that ADHD has a really strong genetic component. It runs in families. About 1/4 to 1/2 of kids with ADHD have at least one parent that has ADHD as well. And when we think about all the tasks of parenting, and the needs that kids with ADHD have, we've done a lot of research showing that parent ADHD can make it a bit harder, more challenging for parents to stick with consistent schedules and routines, to plan ahead and then stick to the plan, to problem solve or show flexibility when various challenges arise. For parents who have attended behavioral parenting programs, they might have difficulty remembering to use those great behavioral skills that they were taught, and instead may fall prey to sort of those automatic negative reactions that they might tend to have. Some parents with ADHD, not all, but some, may have difficulty managing their emotions more generally, and may struggle with the motivation to make the kinds of changes that will best support their kids. And so, another sort of theme of today's webinar is this oxygen mask analogy. And I know in recent years with COVID, some of us haven't been flying as much as we usually do. But when you get on that plane, the flight attendants always say, if you're traveling with young kids, put your oxygen mask on first before you put your child's oxygen mask on. And the idea there is that you have to take care of you. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to help your child. And the same is true for parents of children with ADHD. It really is, as difficult as it might seem, as hard as it might be to imagine, taking time for yourself and focusing on your own health and well being. It really will benefit your child and your family more broadly. So, what I tried to do today for today's webinar is to distill down to 7 tips what we recommend that you might do to help put your own oxygen mask on first. And the first one is to keep tabs on your own mood. As part of our book, and the handouts are available for free from the Oxford University Press website, we actually work with parents on figuring out what time of day works best for them. Same time every day. It might be at bedtime when you're just crawling into bed, maybe when you're brushing your teeth for the final time for the day, to just take stock of how your day was, how your mood was on a scale of 1 to 10, and then reflecting on how you felt as a caregiver that day. And what you'll do is see that the two are quite intertwined. Right? On days when we're in a bad mood for whatever reason, maybe we had a bad day at work or we're feeling particularly stressed in some other area of our lives, we might not feel so great as a caregiver. And similarly, on those days when you feel like you're really struggling as a caregiver, that can affect your mood. And so, what we want parents to begin to do is to just kind of take stock of where they're at and to sort of habit stack or do that along with something else that they do every day, like brush their teeth or crawl into bed at night or have their morning coffee. The second tip is to take time to do things you enjoy. And as parents, oftentimes we put our kids first. We make sure that everything that they need done is done, but we don't necessarily prioritize ourselves. And this is easier said than done, of course. We know, though, from the research literature that pleasant activities can have a huge impact on our mood. And for parents, especially parents of kids with ADHD, making sure to fit these pleasant activities into your day to day life is a true priority. We know that there's research that shows that doing things that we enjoy can improve our moods and even increase our energy. And some of our own research has shown that that can also benefit not only yourself, but also your child and your family. So I urge each of you to take a second to think about what activities bring you the most joy. And it's really different for all of us. For some people, it might be getting coffee with a friend, it might be getting a little bit of exercise every day, getting fresh air. Maybe it is sort of that sense of accomplishment that you get when you complete a task. That might energize some people. For others, it might be going to church or any other house of worship. It might be talking with a family member on the phone. So, thinking about for you, what activities do you have in your life or that you might have sort of gotten away from that could actually sort of energize you and improve your mood? And then one of the things we'll be talking about today is sort of having a calendar system. But I'll urge you to actually do a little experiment and try to schedule those activities into your day at least once or twice a week. And then the second part of it is to keep doing that mood monitoring so that you can realize on days when I went to the gym, I felt a lot better. My mood rating was a lot better on those days. And so by keeping track, we can begin to learn more about ourselves and to figure out what activities for ourselves have the most profound impact on our mood. And I saw this meme the other day. I thought it was great because we don't always have time to go to the spa or to go on vacation or to go out to dinner with a friend. And so, one of the skills that is really important for busy parents is to figure out how you can sort of insert small, pleasant activities into your day to day lives, even when you don't have time for something big like a vacation or a massage or something like that. And so it might mean burning a candle or playing some music while you're working. Or calling a friend on the drive home from work, or things like that, or even just sitting outside for 20 minutes in between meetings or something like that. And so, what's important is that we think of not only huge things that can have a big impact on our mood, but also those smaller things. And then also taking time to enjoy them and to reflect and to be fully present when you're doing those things rather than thinking about all those other things that you might feel like you should be doing instead. The third tip is actually a much bigger shift for many of us. But the third tip is using organizational tools. And for some people, it might be really helpful to enlist the help of a professional when taking on some of these organizational tools. Most of us have some sort of a schedule or calendar system. And we know, in fact, that all kids benefit from having a schedule, and most adults do too. But what the research has also told us is that children with ADHD function much better when they have a consistency in terms of a structure and a routine. And some examples of that would be with sleep and wake times. Going to bed at the same time every night and waking up at the same time improves cognition and mood for your child, but actually also for ourselves. And again, this is another place where parents might often neglect themselves and say, well, at night after everyone goes to bed is when I could actually have some time to myself. It's when I can actually get things done. And before you know it, we're only getting 4, 5, 6 hours of sleep per night. So, setting schedules and routine around sleep wake times is particularly important, yet very challenging for people with ADHD. Also, having the same set morning routine, going through the same steps in terms of, getting up, taking a shower, getting dressed, having breakfast, brushing your teeth. Um, Having this consistent routine is helpful both for yourself as well as for your kids. And I know for myself as a busy mom, getting up a half an hour to an hour before my kids do really helps me to feel like I'm in a better place when they wake up in the morning. And then I don't have the stress of getting ready for work at the same time that I'm trying to support them getting ready for school. The same meal times are really important. I don't know if any of your kids are the hangry type, but I definitely have one child who, when he was younger, whenever he would act up, the first question that would pop into my mind is, when was the last time he ate? So getting a consistent meal time so that you are not hungry, you're not in a place where you're sort of more snippy, and your child is not as snippy can be really helpful. And the same is true for homework time, having that scheduled for your kids, making sure that if they take ADHD medications, that they're doing their homework at a time where their medication is still active, and then having the same type of bedtime routine that we talked about, similar to the morning routine. And so keeping your child's routines consistent are just as important as keeping your routines consistent. Yet we know that consistent schedules are even more challenging when you have ADHD. So part of this is what we refer to as time management, right? And so there are many different strategies that can help us to manage our time better. Sometimes it feels like there are just way too many things to do in one day. And so one of the points here is to set realistic expectations, to make sure that your list of things that you have to do in a day is actually realistic, because otherwise we're stressed and frustrated and running around because we can't possibly get done everything that we need to do. And so the first step of time management is using a schedule or calendar system. And when we talk to parents, most parents do have some type of a schedule or calendar system. In fact, sometimes they have more than one, and that could actually be a little bit dangerous. If you have more than one calendar, you might end up double booking or triple booking because you have a family calendar and you have a home calendar, and you're not looking at them at the same time. And so we will talk a little bit more about how to effectively use one calendar, and then breaking down tasks into smaller component steps. Okay, this is something that all individuals with ADHD do tend to struggle with. Another critical skill is using a prioritized to-do list, meaning sometimes you might feel like you have so many things swimming around in your head that you need to do. And so by writing them down, making a to-do list, and then putting those items into priority order can really help you feel less chaotic and more on top of things. And then finally, remembering that when you have this calendar system, that you're also prioritizing those pleasurable activities and that you actually write those in your calendar. So I personally much prefer an electronic calendar system. I know many people who are really still tied to their hardcover calendars, but I just want to share a few reasons why I prefer an electronic calendar. First of all, most of us have our phones with us all the time. And so if something comes up or something pops into your mind that you need to do, or if you're at the orthodontist and you're scheduling the next appointment, you can put it right into your calendar right then and there. You don't have to wait till you get home and put it in your hardcover calendar or your calendar book. The other reason that I like it is that you can set recurrent appointments. So if your child has dance class every Monday night at 6, rather than having to write it in multiple times, you can put in a recurrent meeting. And then one of my favorite reasons to use an electronic calendar system, especially for people who are struggling with ADHD, is that you can set alerts. You can set an alert for 15 minutes before, you can set another alert for 5 minutes before each calendar entry, and you can have that alarm go off until you dismiss it. And so that can be really helpful for folks who might sort of get hyper focused into their work or something else that they're doing, and hearing that alert can remind them to do that calendar item. And then, as I said, it's really important to schedule in downtime and pleasant activities for all the reasons that we talked about before. Now, one of the executive functioning challenges that we know is linked to ADHD is organizational difficulties and breaking things down. And many complex tasks, like moving or cleaning the garage, or for a child, cleaning their bedroom, actually has lots of different subtasks. Okay. So if you ask your child to clean their bedroom, well, they could put the dirty clothes in the hamper, the books on the bookshelf, the toys in the toy box. There are many different, items, like sub items, that make up this complex task. And for kids and adults alike with ADHD, sometimes these bigger tasks are so overwhelming that they might procrastinate and not want to begin, not even know where to begin. And so by breaking these complex tasks down into subtasks, it's really helpful, because then if they have 10 minutes, they can tackle one of those things. One item on the list doesn't feel as overwhelming as the whole task. And then you get the satisfaction of checking those items off your list. So I encourage you to give this one a try. And I tend to like Google Calendar. Google also has a wonderful task list that you can put on your phone, but there are lots of different systems that you can check out. Now, when you make a to do list, I know my to do list can go on for several pages. It's important to think about, what are these items that matter most, that have the most immediate deadline? What are those things that I absolutely have to do? Okay. And then there might be some items that would be nice to do. Maybe I would like to do them, or I have to do them, but they're due a little bit later than these high priority items. And then what are the things that would, that I'd like to eventually do, but aren't as urgent as the other two. And so I know on my electronic task list, I can reshuffle the items based on their deadlines, and that can be really helpful. Now, if you're anything like me, you might feel like well, there are way too many things that I want to do or that I need to do. How am I possibly going to get this done? And some of you are probably familiar with the metaphor of the rocks, pebbles, and sand. And so some of us find ourselves sometimes filling our jar, and our jar is the finite amount of time that you have, with sand. And so you've got all this sand filling up your jar, which is really the small stuff. And what you find before long is, well, now I have no room for the rocks, which are the most important things, the things that I value the most, the things like spending time with my family or getting my work done. Maybe I answered all these emails and took care of, lots of little things, but the most important things are not getting done. So the rocks are the big, most important things in your life. The pebbles are important, but things that you could live without. And then the sand is really the small stuff. If you organize your jar by first putting in the most important things, the rocks, and then putting in the pebbles, what you'll find is that the pebbles can fall between the rocks, and then the sand just kind of falls and fills in. Yet if you did it the other way around, before long, you're putting in so much sand that there's no room for your rocks. So you get the idea. And so part of this is first kind of stepping back and saying, wait a minute, what are the things in my life that really are the most important, the most valued things, tasks, items, and then what are the pebbles in my life, and what's the sand? And how can I make sure that I'm reprioritizing so those rocks are fitting in first? Okay. So that was a big one. Organizational skills are really important to parenting, and they're really one of the fundamental difficulties that people with ADHD experience. So this isn't just as easy as I made it sound. And as I said, many people might need the help of a professional to help them with organizational skills. The fourth tip that I have for you today is to learn to relax. Some of us just, get stressed easily and have really strong emotional reactions. And in fact, having strong emotional reactions and difficulty sort of managing those emotions are thought to be a core difficulty in ADHD, along with inattention and hyperactivity, impulsivity. It's really that ability to regulate one's emotions. And so there are lots of different relaxation techniques that you might have tried before. One of them is progressive muscle relaxation, where you go through methodically from your head all the way to your toes, tightening and tensing different body areas and then relaxing. That is one example of an exercise that you can do perhaps before bed or when you first wake up in the morning. And we encourage you that when you're learning these skills to practice them when you're already relaxed, and that way you can sort of employ these different techniques when you're feeling stressed. There's another technique called the Benson relaxation technique, where you really just slowly focus on your breath coming in and out. And as you exhale, you can repeat a one syllable word to yourself, like one or peace or om. They're great YouTube videos for each of these techniques, and lots of apps that have been developed. And many of them have little reminder alerts that can go off on your phone. Mindfulness is also a wonderful practice that can really help to put you in sort of a better state of mind and a more relaxed state when dealing with all aspects of your life, but in particular with your kids with ADHD. And so mindfulness is defined as sort of paying attention in a particular way on purpose, being fully in the present moment and non-judgmentally. So not judging the way you're feeling or other people, but just sort of being present. And in today's busy life, many of us are just sort of rushing from place to place and not really noticing the flowers or the trees, or sipping coffee or a cup of tea without really being present and experiencing the smells, the flavors. And so there is this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 mindfulness exercise that you might try. UCLA has a wonderful mindfulness app that's available for free. And the exercise is first, taking a breath and thinking about noticing 5 things that you see around you, and then 4 things that you feel, um, 3 things that you hear, 2 things that you smell, and 1 thing that you taste. And what that does is sort of refocus your attention to the present moment, slows you down, and really can help you to refocus and reset yourself. I'm not sure how many of you have tried mindfulness, but some people really like the progressive muscle relaxation technique. Some prefer the breathing, and some people prefer mindfulness. So I urge you to pick one of those and give it a try for a couple weeks and see what you think, and see if you notice that the effects of that on your mood and how you interact with your child. The fifth technique that we'll talk about today is learning new ways of thinking. And this is what we do in cognitive behavioral therapy. Um, One thing that, that we we all sort of have our own sort of lens that we see things through, and we might pay attention to things that are more positive, or some of us tend to refocus and focus on the negatives and maybe not even notice the positive things that are happening. And of course, your mood can affect your thoughts and what you think and what you pay attention to. um, but some of us just sort of have our baseline of, being sort of more cup half full or cup half empty folks. And in cognitive behavioral therapy, we really focus on how thoughts, feelings, and behaviors influence one another. Um, and when your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors get really negative, we can find ourselves in sort of a negative spiral. So let me give you a couple of examples. Um, okay, so sometimes we might yell at our kids, right? That would be the behavior. And I think most parents yell sometimes, right? So when you yell at your child, that can contribute to different feelings. You might feel more angry. You might feel guilty, like, well, my child has ADHD. Why did I just yell at them? And that can contribute to thoughts like, I'm a bad mom. When you feel like a bad mom, you feel, or when you think that you're a bad mom, you might feel bad about yourself. And you might even be more indulgent with your child to kind of make up for it. Um, you might even blame yourself for your child's behavior, which is going to contribute to you feeling guilty, and eventually depressed, which might make you more withdrawn in terms of taking an active role with your child. And so, what we see is that our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, when they get negative, could really cause us to spiral and impact our mood and our interactions with our kids. But on the other hand, one of the goals of most parenting programs is to have you catch your child being good. So if you are keeping an eye out for your child's positive behaviors and you praise them, that could lead you to think more positive thoughts about your child. And then you might feel more warmth and admiration for them, which can actually fuel more positive thoughts and contribute to you being more positive in terms of your behavior toward them. So, in cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the things that we do are to try to identify different thinking errors that we might sometimes have. We talk about the shoulds. So, when you think that your child should behave a certain way, so my child is 12 years old now. He should be able to get himself up in the morning, and he should be able to do his work independently. but yet he's not. And so when you think in that way of shoulds, it could lead to um, lots of yelling and negativity. And so one way to challenge that is to say to yourself, okay, well, we're working towards my 12-year-old being more independent, but he or she has ADHD, and so this is going to be a process, and they're going to need more support than the typical 12-year-old. Or I might say, I shouldn't have yelled at my child last night. Um, but you could challenge that by saying, well, I'm doing my best. I'm here at this webinar today. We're seeing a family therapist, we're seeing a behavioral therapist. I'm working very hard, and everybody makes mistakes sometimes. And when you shift the way you think, it can contribute to lots more positive feelings and behaviors. I have some other examples of thinking errors here, but for the sake of time, I'm going to keep on moving on. And by participating in this webinar, you have access to the slides as well. Again, we're going through these tips, but changing these patterns of thinking actually takes quite a bit of time and effort. And so don't expect that these kinds of changes will be immediate. But part of it is just noticing, oh, I'm doing that all or nothing thinking again, and trying to correct yourself over a period of time. Okay. The sixth tip focuses on managing emotions. And so we as parents are the number one role model for our kids in terms of how to manage difficult emotions. And as I said, for adults with ADHD, difficulty managing emotions is part and parcel. And when I say that, not 100% of adults with ADHD have difficulty managing their emotions, but you're more likely to have that difficulty if you have ADHD yourself. And so some of these, what we call emotion coaching skills, can really help both you and your child to manage emotions. So the first step is trying to raise your awareness to be aware of your child's emotions and triggers. And then, if you notice yourself starting to have sort of an automatic negative reaction, I encourage you to use some of those breathing techniques or mindfulness techniques to kind of bring yourself down and to validate your child's emotions. It's okay. Everybody has emotions. Having emotions is normal. It's understandable that you're disappointed that it's raining and we can't go to the park today. Or you were really looking forward to your friend coming over after school and now they're sick. That's really disappointing. I would be disappointed too. Um, and similarly, when you're experiencing something that's frustrating, they're watching you. So, you might be driving in DC traffic and you say to yourself, gosh, I really want to scream right now, but instead my child's in the back seat and I'm going to say, wow, it's really frustrating being stuck in this traffic. I'm just going to take a couple of deep breaths, or I'm going to turn on the radio and put on a song that I like to kind of help keep myself calm. And so, through the process of us working on how to manage our emotions, we can model for our kids how to manage their own emotions. And you could say, this is something that we're working on together. And if you do lose your cool sometimes, it's okay to say to your child, I'm really sorry. I lost my temper and I'm working on managing my emotions too. So let's work on this together. Now, of course, if your child has just hit a sibling or done something really destructive, that wouldn't be the time to use emotion coaching. But in general, um, it's really important to try to not distract your child from their feelings, to try not to minimize or judge their feelings. What are you nervous about? There's nothing to be nervous about. Um, And you also, need to be mindful of your child's age, their developmental level. Are they going to be able to express their feelings? Um, Maybe not. Some adults have a hard time expressing their feelings. So, try not to judge, but meeting your child where they're at. And then, importantly, really remembering that at all times you're a model for your child in terms of how to manage their emotions. Another tip, I know we're coming upon the end of the school year, but another tip that we have for parents, particularly when you're struggling with ADHD yourself, is how to best partner with your child's school. Part and parcel of ADHD in kids is that there is typically some level of impairment in the school setting. So, being a true collaborative partner with your child's school is really important. So, how do you do that? And how does ADHD potentially make this more challenging for parents? Well, first of all, for all parents, knowing your child's educational or legal rights under IDEA and Section 504 is really important. Working with any professionals that you're already connected to prepare for the IEP meeting so that you can be a true partner and be effective in terms of what you want to ask for. Another piece of this is being familiar with various evidence based strategies that are helpful for kids with ADHD in the school setting. For example, the daily report card. ADDitude has a lot of great information on these strategies. So I encourage you to check out their materials. And then I think where ADHD comes in, again, this managing emotions, being prepared, being assertive with the school, appropriately assertive, not too passive and not aggressive in asking for what you want, but really using your social skills and your social perspective taking when you're communicating with the school. So, saying things like, I know you're the expert on how my child behaves at school. And, you've been teaching for so long. I'm sure you've worked with lots of kids that are similar to my child. Um, Thanking the teachers, showing gratitude for their efforts, volunteering at the school if that's possible, given your schedule. Remembering and recognizing that you and the school have the same goals, and that is for your child to be successful, and to take a step back and calm down if you find yourself blaming or accusing the school of not living up to their commitment to your child. Along with this and being prepared and asking the school for various accommodations and things like that, it's really important to keep organized records, to keep the emails where they're describing difficult behaviors in your child, to keep a file of their report cards, any disciplinary records, any prior assessments or testing that they've had, preparing in advance for the meeting, writing down some notes for yourself to keep you organized and to make sure that you bring up the questions and concerns that you have. And it's always your right to bring along a supportive friend or professional that can help to hear the things that you're being told and to help you process the meeting afterwards. Um, So I know we've talked about a lot of things today in just 45 minutes so far, but I want to just leave you with some takeaways before we get into the Q&A period. The first one is that parent mental health, parent well-being is critical to the well-being of the whole family, including your child with ADHD. And so because of that, you are a priority. You have to prioritize yourself and it will have trickle down effects to everyone in your house. I encourage you to give the tips we discussed today a try. And these things are not easy for anyone, especially if you're struggling with ADHD. So don't be afraid to reach out and to seek your own mental health care to support you with these strategies if needed. We do have a program that we're running right now, funded by the NIH. It's called the TPAC program, Treating Parents with ADHD and Their Children. And this is a partnership with Children's National Medical Center and Seattle Children's Hospital. So if you have a child between age 3 and 8 years old who is having ADHD symptoms, and you suspect that you have ADHD, and you're living in the DC, Maryland, Virginia, or Seattle metropolitan area, you might want to check out more about our program at www.tpac.org. tpac.com. And then we also created these really cool 1.5 to 2 minute videos, animated videos, where we go over some of the strategies that we talked about today. And so this is just a fun, easy way to remember some of these strategies and to share them with your kids. We call this the tools videos. So check those out. And then, and this is our book, which is intended for therapists or mental health providers. We encourage you to reach out to us if you have any questions. The handouts from our book are available for free on the Oxford University Press website. So you can check those out, and those can help you with some of the strategies that we talked about today. And then I will turn it back over to ADDitude before we start with the Q&A.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Chronis-Tuscano. That was absolutely jam-packed with great ideas. I know I've been jotting down notes, and I wanted to just reassure everyone listening that you will receive a link to the copy of the slides after the webinar, about an hour after we wrap up today. So a lot of people were asking where they could get the copies to share them, to review them. And so you will get that along with the link to replay this video. So I will launch right into the Q&A. Probably the number one question I'm seeing is just whether you have any recommendations for apps and tools that have worked particularly well for you or for others with whom you've worked. A lot of people liked your description of the task prioritization app, and they wondered what that was, and if you had any others for task and time management, and also the mood tracking.
Yes, wonderful. Great questions. I personally like to use Google Calendar and Google Tasks. And so those are both freely available on your App Store, or or your Google Play, or any of those. So I really love Google Calendar, and Google Calendar also has an add-on where they actually ask you about your participation in different kinds of activities, like wellness and things like that. So that can be really helpful too in terms of thinking about your values. There is a wonderful app called Behavioral Activation, APP. Tivation, Tivation. And there you can monitor mood and activities and things like that. I actually find it helpful to just put a little mood rating on my Google Calendar at the top every day. I think that's really helpful. I think the other reason that I didn't get a chance to mention that it's important to monitor your mood is that, sometimes, we're stressed, we might be in a bad mood, but at some point for some people, that really dives into actually a major depressive episode. And it's much easier to pull yourself out of kind of a bad mood than it is when things get so bad that you're actually experiencing a depressive episode. And so it can be helpful in monitoring your mood for you to know when things have been bad for a week, or even going on a couple weeks, because that signals that you really do need some professional help. And so I would actually recommend everyone to kind of just start with the Google Calendar and the Google Tasks. If you try to change all of the things that we talked about today all at once, you're probably not going to have as much success. So I do think that the calendar, having some control over your schedule and your child's schedule, and really kind of starting with the calendar together with the tasks can help you to just feel more on top of things.
Okay, wonderful. And another related question regarding struggles really determining priorities of different tasks. This is a common ADHD challenge. And we've heard in the past some advice about using like the Eisenhower matrix, if you're familiar with that.
Yes,
But I wanted
yes.
to ask your opinion on your advice on how our listeners could go about actually assigning priority to tasks. They say that and estimating the amount of time that things take.
Oh,
Those are two big challenges I'm
yeah.
hearing.
Yes, yes. And these are all very, very common. I think social psychologists have found this, what they call the planning fallacy. So things take longer than we think that they're going to take. And sometimes I just automatically double the amount of time I think something is going to take. So there were a lot of sub questions in there. First of all, with the Google Tasks, you can put in the deadline. So some items have a real deadline, right? So I always put in the deadline, and then I automatically move things up or down based on what the deadline is. So in terms of actual tasks, um, of course, the deadlines are really important, but what happens is some tasks don't exactly have deadlines. And so sometimes people with ADHD will say, well, I don't really feel the press or the motivation to do something if there's not a real deadline, even if I impose sort of my own deadline. And so that can be a challenge. Um, I think that that question's a little bit different than when you were asking about, how do I determine my values? And we actually have a worksheet if you look at the Oxford University Press website, and you could search my name and you'll see the handouts from our book. And we have different categories. And this comes from the Legeway behavioral activation intervention. But, thinking about, what are my priorities for social connection? What are my values? How can I translate that into specific behaviors? So, for example, if I say that my friendships are a major value, then it's not a good idea for me to get so caught up in my day to day life that I never see or call or text my friends. And so, thinking back to the pleasant activities, if a value that I have is my friendships and maintaining my friendships, then I could set a goal for myself to say, to see a friend at least once a week. Um, and if another value that I have is staying physically active, well, maybe I can get a 2-for-1 and go for a walk with a friend. That way I'm getting fresh air, exercise, and also maintaining that social connection. If spirituality is a value for me, then I would want to put into my calendar some time to go to religious services every week, or taking even 5 minutes to say a small prayer every day, or something like that. So we have this worksheet that can really help with that. With kind of just taking stock of what our values are. And one of the things that we know from the depression research literature is that sometimes we become upset and aren't as fulfilled if what we say our values are doesn't really match how we're spending our time. And so, kind of doing this exercise can really help you reflect on what's most important, and then thinking about how can I fit that into my daily schedule. And maybe it won't be daily, maybe it will be like every other week I'm able to get together with a friend or something like that. Or maybe I could send a quick little text to a friend letting them know that I'm thinking of them or something like that.
Okay, wonderful. Um, I did want to share that our listeners today have some extraordinarily good advice. So I'm going to share two little bits that we heard. One person wrote in and said that her family uses Alexa linked with their calendar so that Alexa announces when it's time to transition or when there's an event. And so Alexa is the bad guy. And I thought that was just like brilliant. And another person on this topic you were just speaking on said that they find that they were putting items on their to-do list that were aspirational, and then they
Mm.
were feeling when things were left undone, they were feeling as if they failed. So they have realized that they need to be 80 to 90% certain that they can accomplish a task before they add it to their to-do list.
Hmm. I like that. I think both of those are tremendous suggestions. With the to-do list, sometimes I have aspirational things, but if you, I can put back up my one of my slides where I showed, let's see, where was that? Yes, that there can be, these are the things I must do no matter what. It would be nice to do these too. And you could even have a section for aspirational, right? So, reorganizing my closet. That's not something I have to do. I would like to do that one day, maybe if I have a day off, but that I don't feel bad if I don't do it. And that's sort of in the, not as pressing section. So sometimes it
Mhm.
helps to kind of calm our minds to put down these ideas on paper or, on your phone, but to not feel like you should or you have to do that. And then that goes back to the patterns of negative thinking. To give yourself a break, give yourself some grace. We're all going through a lot right now. And so how can we um you know be kind to ourselves and realize that we are shouldering a lot. Parenting a child with ADHD is really hard. And if you have ADHD yourself, uh, you might need more support with that. Not blaming parents, but just saying that if you struggle yourself with organization, it's really hard for you to provide that organization for your child. And so sort of using affirming thoughts and mantras that can help you to not feel guilty or like a bad parent or things like that.
Mhm. And on that note, a lot of people asking about if they feel that they need some extra help with these specifically sort of executive function related tasks, time management, organization, prioritization. Would you recommend working with an ADHD coach who kind of
Mhm.
recognizes the ADHD specific challenges, or a professional organizer who knows all the tricks of the trade
Hmm.
specifically for getting organized?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would start with someone who knows ADHD. Otherwise, they might not sort of understand what you're going through. And so, right. So, certainly, not being afraid to reach out to, first of all, you can talk to your primary care physician about it. There are websites that have, lists of professionals who specialize in ADHD. Um, ADHD coaches, executive functioning coaches would be a great resource. And then for some people, they might want to consider medication for ADHD. And that's certainly a good adjunct for some people. However, medication doesn't automatically, miraculously give you organizational tools. So even for those who are taking medications, there's usually an additional help that's needed in terms of organizational skills.
Right. And that actually leads, I'm going to squeeze in one last question. It leads very nicely to it, which is quite a few listeners realizing that though they've never been diagnosed, that the symptoms of ADHD sound quite familiar to them. And they're wondering if it is common for women to be diagnosed after, during motherhood. Could it be that parenting a child with ADHD could cause a tipping point?
Well, that's a great question. Recent work and attention to the work of Steve Hinshaw at Berkeley has really pointed to the fact that women get diagnosed with ADHD much later than boys and men, because a lot of times their symptoms are not sort of the typical characteristic symptoms that we think of when we think of ADHD. Oftentimes, we see moms who, when we are diagnosing their kids and asking them questions, they realize, wow, this sounds a lot like how I was as a child. And so, unfortunately, after all these years of being sort of misunderstood and not identified as having ADHD, they might feel really badly about themselves. And there's, often a lot of like anxiety and depression and things that can follow that. And so we do encourage moms who are feeling that way to talk to their primary care doctor about referrals to actually get a diagnosis of adult ADHD. But even in the absence of a diagnosis, working with someone on some of these strategies can still be very helpful.
Right. Wonderful.
Mhm.
Well, I'm sad to say that we are out of time for today, but Dr. Chronis-Tuscano, thank you so much. You left us with so many wonderful resources to refer back to use, and to share. Everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that you will continue to attend ADDitude's free webinars. We have one next week, which is a parent's guide to the best school options for students with ADHD and LD with Kathy Kuhl. And to make sure that you don't miss any of our future webinars or articles or research updates, you can sign up to receive our newsletters at attitudemag.com/newsletters. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.